Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Online Smicha. The halachas of Tvilas Kelim in Shulchan Aruch is all condensed in one siman. Siman Kuf in Yeridea, Siman Kuf Chaf Aleph, and actually Siman Yeridea, Siman Kuf Chaf. Sorry, and there are 16 seifim. So basically, everything that you have to know about Tvilas Kelim is somehow, somewhere covered in these 16 sifim. So I'll tell you, I'm going to use a tool that we used for our students on Online Smicha when we learned the halachas of Tvilas Kelim, and I'm going to go through a question and answer chazara sheet that goes over and makes a pretty good review on these halachas. And some of these questions are also very, very relevant, very timely questions, especially now when it's getting closer to Pesach. The questions and answers are going to go, I'll say to the Shulchan Aruch, the 16 sif in the Shulchan Aruch, and then I will quote some of the achronim of questions that are more applicable to today's days, not necessarily applied back then. But you'll get the Yesodus, the foundation of how to be Maven Dover, Miteich Dover from the Shulchan Aruch. Question Aleph. Which Kelim are you mechuyev to bring to the mikveh, to dunk into the mikveh? What type of Kelim? And why? So the halacha in Shulchan Aruch is if you buy from a goy, Kli Su'uda. The definition of a Kli Su'uda will be a keli which you bring to the table and you put the food directly in it. How do we know this? The ksiv, because the pasuk says, this is brought in the Taz, Kol davar asher yavoy ba'esh. When the Torah describes the kelim that have to go through a process, so the Torah says that the keli which was placed over fire. Now, a hammer, a screwdriver is also a keli, but it's not a keli which you use on fire. So from there we know that only a kli su'uda, only a keli which is used with hot food, is a keli that you have to dunk into the mikveh. Question Beis. Kelim made from what materials are mechuyev to go to the mikveh, and why? And how do you know this? So the Mechaber goes on to say that the halacha of Tvila applies if the kelim are made from matchis, metal, or zechuchis, or glass. How do we know that these are the exceptions to the rule? Because the Torah describes different types of kelim. The Torah goes on to say 5 or 6 types of kelim. And the Torah introduces this by saying, Ach es hazav, but the one made from zav. And we know that the word ach is always an exclusion, that this group and only this group. So anything which is like this group of kelim, zav, copper, nechoshes, etc., which is part of an umbrella family, will have to be dunked into the mikveh. If, however, it's completely a different type of material, nothing like, similar to these 5 or 6, won't have to be brought to the mikveh. Ma tam Tvilas Kelim. What is the reason, B'chal, the Torah wants us to dunk a keli into the mikveh? So this is based on the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, because when a Yid buys something from a Goy, in the earlier time it was in the Goyish domain, and to elevate the object, the keli, from into the level of the Kedusha of a Yisrael, it has to go through the mikveh process. Question Dalid. Where do you dunk a kelim to fulfill this Tvila? So in simple words, the pasuk says, the halacha in Shulchan Aruch is, b'mikveh oy b'mayim shel arba'im sa'ah. It's either you put it into a mikveh, dunk it into a mikveh, a kosher mikveh, or you dunk it into a mayan, a well of arba'im sa'ah, which is interesting because typically we say a mayan does not need arba'im sa'ah. And we know this from the pasuk, where the pasuk says that it has to be ach b'mei nida, that we treat this, the halacha of the Tvila of kelim, like nida, where it has to be a serious mikveh. Mahu chatzitza b'tvilas kelim. What is considered a chatzitza that you have to be careful that the dunking in the mikveh should be done properly? So later on in Sif Yud Gimel, it says you got to take off any rust any schmutz, because anything like that which a person is makpid that it shouldn't be in the keli would be considered a chatzitza. Do you have to dunk in? Do you have to make sure that your hands holding the keli is a chatzitza to the keli? It doesn't allow the water to circulate everywhere in the keli. So believe it or not, in the Shulchan Aruch it says, lechatchila, you have to soften up, weaken up your hand that it shouldn't be tight on the keli to allow the water to get in all spots of the keli. And if it was tight, you have an issue. So the best thing to do is to water your hands with mikvah water. The Ramah insists that only with mikvah water this works, that if you water your hands with mikvah water, then you could hold the keli if you feel that you must hold it tight. What is the bracha you make when you dunk the keli in? So if you're doing Tvila on one keli, you say it b'lashon yachid. You'll say al Tvilas keli. If you do two or more, you say al Tvilas kelim. Now let me. It's very important to note this now. There is going to be different types of kelim that are going to be obligated to be brought to the mikvah. There are some that are suggested. Now the big difference between obligation and suggestion is a bracha. When it's a chiyuv, then you're able to make a bracha on the chiyuv. When it's only a suggestion, you have to be very careful not to make a bracha. And for that, there's a solution. If you feel guilty that you're doing this and you feel like you're doing it halfway, so you wait to bring that keli to the mikvah only when you have another keli which is obligated, and then you make the bracha on the obligated keli, and it goes over on this one too. Ches, a keli which is like a tripod, where you just hold, where you put the pots on it like a stand. Do you have to put it in the mikvah? So this is interesting, because concerning hag'olah, we say there might be a problem because the hot tray for the hot chametz spills over it. Concerning Tvila, the food doesn't sit on it. If the food doesn't sit on it, it does not have to go in the mikvah. Question test. A sakin shel shchita, a chalif. You're shechting an animal. The animal is meat. Meat is food. Does it have to go to the mikvah? So the Mechaber and the Ramah bring two opinions. Yesh misha omer that it doesn't need it, go to the mikvah because the food is not ready yet. V'yesh choylkin, it's not, it's meat, and therefore the Ramah suggests v'toiv l'toiv l'ay bracha. You should put it into the mikvah, but you don't have to make a bracha. Again, here's where you see that it's best to do it, but bracha I can't allow you. Do you have to put the pot covers in the mikvah? Yes. A wooden keli that has pins of metal from the outside, or has some structure of metal on the outside, is it mechuyev in Tvila? The answer is no, because as long as the ikar part of the keli is made out of eitz is not mechuyev b'Tvila. A kais shel kesef, a silver keli, a golden keli, silver becher, that's put together with pieces of wood chips, do you have to put it in the mikveh? The answer is yes. If you take a loan, a keli, if you borrow kelim from a guy, you didn't buy it from the guy, do you have to put it into the mikveh? Or if you rent a keli from the guy, the answer is no. It's only, this halacha of Tvila only applies when you buy the keli. And this is a very common practice, because in all the halls and rentals and all these places where you rent kelim for an event, for a bar mitzvah, for chasna, everybody only thinks about kashering it, to take out the isser taste. Whatever happened to the Tvila? And the answer is because it's rented, it's on loan, there is no mitzvah of Tvila then. If a yid bought a keli from a guy and gave it out as a loan to his friend, does he have to bring it to the mikvah? The answer is yes, because once the yid brought the keli, it already became the chayiv. Unless the person, as we mentioned before, person number one is only obligated to put in the mikvah if he has it as a kli suda. There are certain kelim that could be used for a knife, for example. A person could buy a knife as a letter opener, as a card to chop cards or anything like that. So if it only becomes a mechuyev in my reshus when I had in mind to use it as a kli suda, and then nobody could use it until they put it into the mikveh. If a guy gave a keli to a yid as a mashkin, as a guarantee for a loan, does it have to go to the mikveh? The answer is it depends. If you see that the guy is not interested in paying back his loan, he's expecting you to keep that as his payment, then for you to use it, you have to put it in the mikveh. If imlav, and if you're not sure, if you think it's only a temporary usage that you're going to have, you should still put it in the mikveh, but with belay bracha. What's the din if a yid gave gold or silver to a guy to make a dish, to make a becher for him from my material that I gave, from a Yiddish material that he gave a guy to do, to the craftsman, the guy? The din is einay tzarech Tvila, according to the Mechaber. V'yesh cholkim, however, those that argue, again, whenever there's a machlekes, in other words, whenever you're in doubt, not better without completely, better without a bracha, but the Tvila, you can never lose by putting something into the mikveh. You could lose by saying a bracha. What's the din if a yid sold a keli to a guy and he bought it back from him? The answer is he has to put it into the mikveh because it went through the goyish domain. What's the din if a yid and a guy bought a keli b'shutfus, partnership? Is it mechuyev b'tvila? The answer is it's einay tzarech tvila. You're not obligated in tvila. That's the din. I'm going in the order of the Shulchan Aruch Siman Kuf Chav. What happens if there was a robbery and a guy took different things away? He took kelim away from the yid, and Baruch Hashem, we found the kelim. The fact that we found the keli, is it mechuyev b'tvila now because it went through the goyish domain? So the halacha in Shulchan Aruch is einay tzarech tvila. However, if it's a sar, if it's a governor or a paritz, the old-fashioned paritz that had permission to just take whatever he wanted, and when he took it, it was his to keep, and somehow you got it back, the din is then it would need tefillah, the kvar nishtaku b'yadei v'gechavim, because once they take it, those type of level of people take it, it's gone, it's history, it's theirs. Do you have to kasher the handle of the keli? The answer is yes. Could a cotton do tevilas kelim, and is a cotton trusted about tevilas kelim? There are two separate questions. A cotton to do tevilas kelim means, could he be the one to perform the dunking of the mikveh, in the mikveh? The answer for that is, what's the question? As long as it went into the mikveh, it's fine. As long as it went into the mikveh clean, meaning to say there's no chatzitza, and he did a proper dunking. Elamai, the discussion is, does it have to have a kavana? Bless Brera, even if there's no kavana, as long as it was done, it's fine. That's if somebody watched to say that it was done. A cotton has a different problem. His problem is that he's not trusted as a testimony. If he comes to tell me that he did it, I can't trust him. But if he was the one doing it while somebody else was watching, that's not a problem. Because there's somebody else who will be the one testifying that he did it. But the gadol not necessarily has to do it. He has to be there. A gadol emel agavav. How about a guy? Could a guy working in a hardware store do the mikveh, the dunking in the kelim? And is he trusted? So over there is a little slightly different. Even though the bottom line is he put it into the mikveh. But it's slightly different because the lashon in the Shulchan Aruch is, if the keli was done by a guy, b'di'evet, it's fine. It's preferable that it should not be done by the guy. And of course, a guy is not trusted to say that he did it if nobody was watching, because a guy is not memon. Could you toivel kelim in Shabbos and Yontif? When a person has a keli on Shabbos and he realizes, I need to use this, but it's not toivel, what are the options? So the halacha in Shulchan Aruch says, if you have no other choice, you should give it to a guy as a present and take it back from him as a loan. Then, because it's not bought from the guy, you could use it temporarily. What should a person do who lives in a place where there's no mikveh? He could always try to do this trick, but eventually he has to find a time and place where he could eventually put everything through the mikveh, but under pressure, he could do this to give it as a present to a guy and get it back. What happens if somebody used a keli that did not go into the mikveh, and he used that keli? What's the status of the food that was cooked in that keli? Al pi din, the food is still 100% kosher. It's something that should not be done, but it doesn't affect the food. Okay, now I'm going to go through some of the kelim, some of the discussions that are in today's, some of the very relevant discussions for today's times. How about a keli, which is not made out of glass, not made out of metal, not made out of something permanent like that, aluminum foil, something which you use once or twice. This question is much bigger than just over here in Hilchos Tvilas Kelim. It depends on many things. It depends, like for Mashal and Kiddush, there's a machlekes between Moshe Feinstein and Diane Weiss. Let's understand what this is all about. If it's a keli which you don't use permanently, it really doesn't have any chashivas to it. It's something that has no chashivas because you're going to throw it out right away. If it has no chashivas, it doesn't have a din as a keli. If it doesn't have a din as a keli, perhaps you don't. That's the way around it. If you believe it's something not chashiv that doesn't have a din of a keli, the whole halacha doesn't apply, and just applies by a kli suda. And if this is not a chashiv a keli, you could ignore it. Let's take a can of tuna fish. Let's take a jar of pickles. Here is a very interesting shaila. You ever think about the can of vegetables? It's made out of tin. Tin is a metal. A jar of pickles. How could you eat? Why should you? To eat the pickle that's in there now, or to eat the tuna fish is in there, mela. But to empty out the jar of pickles and to use that jar, why wouldn't you have to put it in the mikveh? So there is a very long discussion. In simple words, most of these cans and jars, the way around toiveling it is by saying to yourself, when you bought that keli, when you bought the pickles, you can't carry pickles in your hand, so you have to have a way to carry it. It's in the bag, it's in a box, in a can, in a glass. So you're not really buying the keli. And even if you're buying the keli as part of the process of buying, but in your mind, the can of tuna fish is going straight into the garbage right afterwards. So it never allowed it to be a chush of a thing, so to create the issue of Tvila. If for some reason somebody thinks that he's going to finish eating the pickles and then use this glass jar for storing food or whatever, he has to know that at that point he should bring it into the mikveh. But it shouldn't stop somebody from buying canned tuna fish or buying canned vegetables because of the keli, because the keli at this point, A, you're not interested in buying its bottle to the food, and B, in your mind, it's a junk keli. So let's go through some of the different types of kelim. And I'm going to go through a list of halachas that are brought, and you'll find some of them very interesting, lamaisa. If somebody goes to a store and just wants to test, he's buying something, he's not sure if he wants it. He wants to try it. So that's not called yet koina keli. So you must put it into the mikveh only even before you're sure you're going to buy it, because that's not a proper kinyan. If you're going to a friend's house or a Makurev's house, and that Makurev, you're not sure if he keeps the mitzvah of Tvila b'kelim. So could you eat the food? The food is kosher. Obviously, you're not going to eat non-kosher. The food is kosher and everything is kashered, but the keli might not be toivel. So it's preferable that you should not eat from kelim that are not toivel. But if it was taken out of that kelim, those kelim, if it was cooked in the keli that was not toivel, but now it's in a paper plate or something like that, it's not the end of the world. To drink in a place where they sell drinks, or eat in a restaurant where we're not certain if they put all the kelim in the mikvah. This is a shaila within a shaila, because only kli suda is mechuyev b'mikvah, Tvila. Some say that's not a kli suda, that's a business. That's a business. A restaurant is a business. So if it's a business, there's ways around it. So there's a loophole in that situation too. A guy which is nisgayer, so l'chayra he's changing from gerish and nisgayer to kedushas Yisrael. Many poskim suggest that he should put all his kelim in the mikvah, but b'loi bracha. I mentioned before about the tin cans. Let's go through some more inyanim that are interesting. We spoke about the very important. If a yid owns a hardware store, a yid owns a hardware store, and they're also selling kelim to goyim, it's preferable that you should not just be careful and put everything you own in the store to mikveh first. You should only once somebody buys it, then it's kaina, then he's kaina, only then he puts it in the mikveh. You shouldn't do it in advance. Now, amongst the kelim that need Tvila, there are some kelim that you don't make a bracha on them. For example, if it's a type of keli that even though it's used for food, but the food is not completely done, for example, a rolling pin, a meat grinder, a sack and shchita, then it's questionable. Because it's questionable, as I mentioned before, Shulchan Aruch says that you don't make a bracha. A keli that doesn't another example of a keli that doesn't completely make the food ready, or a keli that you don't actually drink from it, it's more of a keli that's storage. Some people say it's better if you don't make a bracha. It has to be a kli su'uda. Kli su'uda, the definition of a kli su'uda is food directly in it, not food put in through a bag in it, etc. When you bring it to the mikveh, how many times should you dunk it in? Obviously, al pi halacha, it's enough to dunk it in once. There are some poskim say you should dunk it in 3 times, but obviously once is enough. Electric keli, that is a very complicated issue. Electric keli, you don't want to put electric keli in the mikveh, because in the mikveh is water, and it's going to ruin the keli. So people are afraid. So if you could take it apart, if you could put it into mikveh, you're not afraid, kol hakavod. That would be best. There are other solutions other ways around it. The way around it is if you take this electric keli and make something, a damage to it, that it loses its status as a keli, and then fix it. Stuff it up. When you do that, when the keli becomes broken, it lost its status of a keli. When you fix up that hole, you just made a keli. It's a keli shel Yisrael. A keli shel Yisrael is not mechuyev in mikveh. Others say you just put in the parts. If you have no other choice, it's going to ruin the electricity. It's going to be dangerous. You just put in the parts that are not with electric, because the electric parts could be considered mechubar lekarka, because you plug it into the wall. That is another heter. Or cover over, or dunk it into the mikveh with a cover over that place where the electric is. One or two last things. We mentioned about all metal kelim, aluminum, steel, stainless steel, lead, all have to go into the mikveh and you have to make a bracha. Anything made out of plastic. Now in the Shulchan Aruch we spoke about metal, steel, or glass. What is the status of plastic? So me'ikar adin, plastic does not need Tvila, because as we mentioned before, what needs Tvila? Only the things, only the things that are in the iron family, the metal family, and zechuchis. But plastic is a new creature, a new creation. So plastic is, for many reasons, should be similar to wood. Plastic is not mechuyev b'tvila, but amachmer alatzma ilat tvila on somebody who wants, again, you never lose by dunking a keli into the mikveh and elevating it to the kedusha. But on plastic, you do not make a bracha.